It's ordinary, it's perfectly understandable, it's something that helps us get through the day, get through the night. And we do that a lot in our everyday life. We're constantly looking at what's happening inside of us, but from a point of view of trying to make some changes to it, or to explain it or justify it to ourselves or to someone else. But the cultivation of pure witness that could enter into human life as we live it is actually the pure, non-attached witness that is has no agenda except to see, just to look. That we don't do, because nothing in our culture and environment, and in much of our even in our spiritual practices that we might have, really encourages that. To cultivate that, first of all, to be aware of it as something that may be connected to another kind of possibility within us that we don't know about, that we've just heard about, because the pure witness may represent a capacity that we rarely ever exercise. We rarely just look for the sake of looking, not for the sake of accomplishing something, doing something. And that cultivation of that pure witness, when it gets really well developed, becomes a possible cultivation of another entirely state of consciousness, which we only know from experience when we are in certain unusual states of what we spoke about at one point of joy or danger or critical moments. Just we don't know what happen to be fully present in our life, in our state, in our inner world. And those moments of more pure presence, when I'm just aware that I exist, that I'm alive, and I'm not trying to do anything, just this sense of just being here, present, which we sometimes get in moments in our life, is really like a call to another part of ourselves that's just not yet developed. So this guided kind of thing we're speaking about is a cultivation and from getting familiar with that capacity in us, so that it can enter into our everyday life, our relationships, our actions. Because when that's cultivated and it begins to develop, begins to mature, and the body and the other ordinary emotions of our everyday life and our thoughts begin to accept it and really realize there is somebody else in this house that I didn't know about. And when that somebody else begins to appear, it has a strange feeling, unusual feeling of being me, really more me than me, more I than I. And that when that begins to be developed in the body and the personality and all that we are usually, begins to become aware of it and accept that it's not the boss, it's not the master, something else is there that's very special. Then it can develop into something which can actually act in our life, so that we become. Because when we sit in meditation, if it's really sensible, intelligent work, I see that one sees that one is closer to being the kind of person one imagines or one would wish to be, because in that kind of a state, one is not anxious, one is not full of hatred and certain kind of emotional agitation. One is capable in such states of inner quiet, of true generosity and feeling for other people, which isn't egoistic, yourself that is full of a certain kind of self-respect that you rarely have, that's quite different from the egoistic self-image that usually torments us in our life. So it means, in a larger sense, the familiarization with our psyche in a way that allows another kind of consciousness to become more apparent and to maybe play a bigger role in my everyday life. That's what we're talking about. This is the idea of it. And the practice of it takes time, and it takes help with other people who have more experience, perhaps, and other people could work together.
So psychoanalysis is not included in this type of...
Psychoanalysis is certainly part of it, can be understood as part of the direction, but it has not the same aim. Its aim is a kind of immediate healing to get us out of a neurotic condition where we can hardly function in a way. So it's a form of a therapy that has a certain element of self-examination and self-knowledge, which is not totally strange to what I'm speaking about, but it's like one step in a direction, and then it stops. It serves its purpose. It's a kind of medicine. And this, what I'm speaking about, never stops. It goes on and it keeps developing and developing. And it has a goal that is completely different from the psychoanalytic, which is a therapeutic medical goal, and very necessary. We all need therapy of one kind or another to get through the night. So it's not like it's against it, but it's not the same thing. Yeah.
So I do think that eventually I am going to leave just because I'm in need of a nice long walk, but I wanted to make sure that before I did leave, that I got the chance to thank you for this class, because I think especially maybe some of my fellow grad students in here can sort of attest to what I'm about to say, but I think that in an age when studying philosophy at the university is, at least in the mainstream, it's become very technicalized and seems to, in some sense, be very detached from the so-called spiritual aspect of the philosophical lifestyle. In an age where that is the mainstream, right? It's very rare to come across sort of a class like this, right, that deals with transformative knowledge, right, and reads the Gita and Meister Eckhart and stuff like that. So, although I know that at San Francisco State we have a really good department, it has, philosophy and religion as one sect of it, right? But definitely sort of the more active tenure faculties are doing this so-called, the analytic stuff that seems very detached. So, I just want to thank you for sticking around and letting people have the opportunity to take a class like this, because as far as I can see it, it's something that's very important to the philosophical pursuit. And so, yeah, before I took off, I just wanted to thank you for that.
Well, thank you for thanking me. When you're a teacher of this kind of material, and you have the joy of seeing another person's mind wake up to something they didn't know about, that is very meaningful and brings a certain kind of hope. There's very little out there that brings real hope. And if that touches people, then there's a hope in coming in touch with the capacity within oneself that one wasn't supported very much in everyday life and academic life. So I'm glad that you found it helpful. But we will be going further into this kind of thing on Sunday night if you wish to come to that. But before you take your long walk, could you sign it? Yes. You came late. I announced that there'd be a meeting if people wanted totally non-academic, as this is in a way already, on Sunday night at 6:30 at the Greenhouse Cafe in West Florida.
6 o'clock?
I want people who want to come to that to sign, so I know how many people are coming. Yes, now you had a point to make.
I wanted to actually thank my colleague here for asking your question, because I've been meditating for a few years now, and it's a struggle. It's hard because of the very thing that you were describing, of the quieting the mind. I love how you said the anxious introspection, and the idea that you go in and meditation automatically seems like I'm uncomfortable, I'm doing it wrong, the whole thing. And because I was just the last minute working on my paper, I was thinking about Meister Eckhart's Eternal sermon. That was the last one we covered last week. And in it he keeps saying, or he really advises, you have to empty out everything. And I had written something in the paper that, in my deeply Southern Christian background, we used to call that a God-shaped void that only God could fill. But he was so big in it that nothing else could be there. And I'm coming back to meditation. But one of the things that, of course, that Eckhart says is you have to let go of memory and understanding and all these agents of the soul that sort of act like distractors and things of that sort. And that's what meditation, I think, does. Is that it gets you, because I was thinking as you're speaking, yes, it's kind of practice a little bit for this, or this possibility, or letting us know it's possible to get to that point. And I'm realizing that every single time we meditate, when we finally get past the anxious, oh, I better go pay the bill, or oh, I'm thinking about food, I'm doing this wrong, or whatever, you realize that what you're doing is slowly but surely emptying out and making that room for that transformative knowledge to come in. Because if you start putting in your judgments, oh, I forgot the cat litter, or that person said this to me, or you're actually filling that space back up. You start off thinking, I'm going to sort of do an introspection of what's inside here, and then in the end, you end up at the very end of the meditation filling it back up with more things. The more we try to do that and think about it, whereas after time, you're just recognizing, I'm not going to judge. And that automatically takes that judgment out of whatever, you were just feeling about the judgment then, about I'm not doing this right, or I'm hungry or something. And because I was having a hard time with that, with Meister Eckhart's sermon on that, thinking, well, how do you just blankly, just empty everything out? And it really is that process of learning how. I think that's the only activity really that we can do, is to say, well, I accept you're pouring in, and by accepting it, I'm going to make room. It's like knowing someone's going to come to stay for the holidays, and you clean out the spare bedroom. You take everything out of there so that somebody can actually sleep in it. And so I was not putting that together until you asked your question, and you'd actually started to respond to that. But I really like that. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a rabbi story of the Hasidic convert. There are many of these little stories about the Hasidic tradition in Judaism is a spiritual practice that is not something you find in the synagogues, or generally speaking. It's more of an inner work. And was very strong when it was thriving in Central Europe a couple hundred years ago. It still is in places. But the story is this kind of these stories are usually when a person comes to the Rebbe, as they're called, which is not the same as a rabbi. The Rebbe is the spiritual guide, and the rabbi is more like the clergyman, priest, or something. But the Rebbe is the wise guy, wise man, not wise guy. But and he says, and the man is moving, has to move his family to another village. And he asked the Rebbe, Rebbe, how will I recognize a real Rebbe when I meet one? How can I recognize him? And the Rebbe says, well, if you see someone who seems to offer that, or you just go to him and ask him, how can I stop the constant movement of my thoughts? And if he tells you how to do it, he's not a real man. this, what's called this emptiness. And what Eckhart is talking about, as you yourself said, and is what the priest at the end of the book begins to sort of argue with him about, is very difficult, very advanced. To come to a totally empty state, which is not just drugged out or something of that kind, but a conscious emptiness, is very difficult. And any rules for fixing things just have to be very careful about that. Therefore, we need to have somebody who's been around the block, not just once, but 1,000 to help us with that kind of thing. And so I would be very tentative about what you just said, as hold it as a question. Because when you have a question which troubles you, as this will eventually trouble anybody, is how the thoughts keep coming and coming and seem to be just have an action of their own and interfere with any other kind of state you feel called to. When you really have a question about that, you're suffering, in a way suffering, but you can't help it. At that point, it's a very serious point, because it means you have a real experience that you cannot deny of difficulty. It's something you can't take care of, you can't fix, you can't do it. You try, yes, but that means you come to a state of real questioning, of need. It's not just curiosity, it's not just I want to succeed and all that. That maybe goes on for a long time. I want to fix it, I want to do it. The books tell me to do, I want to be what Meister Eckhart does, or Joseph Buddha, or whatever. And that real question. When you have a real question, and you really are stopped by it, at that point you're stopped by the question, and the mind begins to quiet down.
You stop trying to
Stop
answer the
by the
question.
question, how do I do this? I don't know how. I need to, but I can't.
Yeah.
You stay with that fact at some point, and that takes help. Don't try to go home and do it, but that takes help. This is the spiritual phenomenology of the question. When you come to a real question, not just I want to fix it, I don't know how, but when you feel there's something very critical as I said, in my own being, that makes you more intelligent all by itself. It makes you more sensitive all by yourself. So we're talking about coming to a real question, and a real question like that makes me more sensitive, more intelligent, and more in need. I stop my usual things. I don't believe anymore in the automatic thing. I don't believe in fixing. I just am in question. That's a really sacred state that one has to cultivate, and it takes a lot of experience and wisdom of a certain level to realize that that is not something you want to get rid of. The more you are in question, the more you are open. And that goes into a deep, possible, far-reaching, deeply secret interpretation of Christianity. Because the fundamental message of Christianity and every great spiritual path is that, and Eckhart has this very clearly, is that the more I need, the more I'm aware of how far I am from God in that case, the more God can come in. Because that's just what is being waited for, is the sense of need. I can't do it, and I need it. At that point, the human being is open and can receive. So then we come back to what you started with. But what you started with is really what comes in the middle, not at the beginning.
Yes.
You see what I'm
I
saying?
love to say this has been, I felt personally defeated for so long in trying to, personally defeated, just in feeling, meditation is not working because of such reason. It's interesting that you say a guided self-examination, because for some reason, when I'm in group meditation, and there's somebody even just giving us the timing, now open your eyes or whatever, for some reason, there is a falling into it that is much easier than when I sit myself and try and, or go into it. So I wonder too, is there something about, even though it's a personal and intimate pouring in and being open and being vulnerable and realizing that, is there something about other or community or not being alone with it? I'm not sure. I mean, I don't even know how to state my question.
I think it's right, you really have to have help with others,
Yeah.
of one kind or another. I don't think anybody can do this alone very much. Everyone, one way or the other, we can, in some sense, recognized as generally somewhat enlightened. All the great teachers have had help. Everyone has had help. Sometimes it's not visible in what written or something. We don't know who helped Eckhart. He probably would say God. Probably it was someone else too. So the point is that to guide, it's possible to be guided in such a way that you're guided and help to find a way of finding it for yourself. It's not laid upon you, and that's your taking from someone, some method, some path, some procedure that is not your own necessarily. But there is certain kinds of guidance, as there is in ordinary education, with children, where you help them and help them to in order to work on their own, in order to find something on their own. When you learn a musical instrument or that kind of thing, it's help is not so much to become the miniature of the teacher, copying the teacher, but being helped in such a way that you find your own. When you learn to paint, for example, portraits or something of that kind, you may start by copying Rembrandt, but after a certain point, you have to come to your own. And maybe that's a dynamism that goes on for a long time between being helped from the outside and finding it for yourself. But ultimately, if you're not discovering your own search, your own capacity, then probably there's a certain point when it will be stalled at that point, and you won't go further. That's something to look at.
Okay, one more question. Why is it that we take a lifetime to do this? Why is this such a struggle?
What if the human life only becomes meaningful in the midst of conscious suffering, in the midst of struggle? Maybe it's a struggle which isn't tense. There is a sense of struggle which is maybe very intense, very painful, very in a way destructive, even wasteful. And there's a sense of struggle which is honorable, and there's a sense of struggle which is liberating. And even maybe to call it a struggle at a certain point is misleading. But the path never ends. But, there's so many levels of possibility. But when you reach a certain level of search, then you know something is pouring into you, and that has to be shared with someone else. So maybe the ultimate thing is not finally, here I am, I've reached nirvana, I'm going to sit down, that's it. I'm just going to sop up the nirvana, and so become kind of like a plant that just sits there and does nothing. I think that people who have attained to this kind of greater consciousness are busy searching for people who can be helped. It's said that if you don't share what you receive, what you've received is literally wastes away, stays away. It's part of the laws of love. So if something's given to you finally, and you don't find a way to give it to someone who needs it,
well, you could say, why doesn't God stay with us? Or why doesn't the experience of God last in us as something constant? And his response is that if it did, we would just sit there and sort of soak it up, and we wouldn't be spurred into action. And that made so much sense to me, just logically, because when it goes away, then you can have it sink into you, or your soul, and then have that sort of inform your everyday life and your actions.
Well, he says a very interesting thing in that part you're referring to that would be very helpful to people. He says, because he says, you will ask, why does it last why is it so brief? Why does it go away? Why doesn't God stay? However he puts it. And Eckhart says something like, God knows what you need, and he goes away when he sees it's not good for you at this point. You're not ready for that. Or he goes away and then comes back, and then he goes away. It's up to him, not up to you. And that's a very profound statement. Which could, on one level, just be silent. Well, it's just getting out of a difficult question. But it's a very profound statement because that, whatever you call God in this case, it can be some kind of energy, if you like, or some kind of vibration, some kind of force, consciousness, or whatever it is. It's nothing that, there are many aspects to that. It has its intelligence. It can't be manipulated. It can't be forced. It's like a poem if there were a poem by Rumi or something, it would be well, the question, why is it? There's a question, if we have one of Rumi's thousands of little kind of quatrains, of little short conversations. And something like this one says, I'm walking along with the friend. The friend is Rumi's with God, with Allah, with God. I'm walking along with a friend. And he says to the friend, when you're not with me, I'm like a fish out in dry sand, gasping for breath. And he goes on with things like that. I'm alone, I'm suffering, I can't bear it. And the friend says to him, but you choose that. Now, that's one way of saying something that bears an examination. That maybe this presence is not something you can bear for very long. Maybe there's something about it that is in you, in us, that is really put in question, is threatened by that kind of love, that kind of presence in us. So maybe this whole being, psycho-spiritual being that is human and we're born with and grow up with, has many dark corners yet that we don't know about, that have to be touched by this whole thing in order for transformation to take place. And they don't yet know it, so they haven't been informed. The word hasn't gotten out to them that there's something of a much, much greater power and beauty that needs to enter, that will help them very much, but they're scared. They don't know it. I'm personifying it kind of a way, that we don't know all the process by which this transformation has to go through. It isn't necessarily like that. Maybe it can be a sudden experience like that, where the whole person is sort of lit up, but maybe for anything really solid and that could persist in Zen Buddhism, particularly in the Rinzai section, can be very strong. They have between various forms of Zen, there's some kind of apparent disagreement. Some say it's a long, gradual process of meditation and work, and inner work, and others say Satori is sudden, immediate. And so it's really like when I don't know who it was says, yes, it's a sudden awakening that takes 30 or 40 years to get. So it's like a person becomes an overnight star after 30 or 40 years of acting. Because these things take time, and maybe there's a flash that can happen all at once. But I think we'll find that most of these spiritual paths are working with time and growth of a certain kind. So I think when Eckhart says, Jesus, quotes Jesus as saying, he says in the gospel, he's a little while and I'm with you now, and in a little while I will be gone, and in a little while I will come back. And it sounds like he's talking about death and resurrection, but he also, as Eckhart says, he's talking about this experience of this higher being comes and goes without our knowing why. Well, we've gotten into very serious waters right away.
It's actually very nice to be able to ask these questions.
It's good it's not part of the same paper for suggestion. Yes?
No, I was just saying, it's like Kyrie was saying, it's good to be able to ask these questions in this kind of setting because
Yeah, I'm really,
we pursue academics, but there's some things it doesn't address.
it's really very touching to me that these kinds of, that people are hungry for this kind of conversation.
Very hungry.
Yeah.
But they go away.
What?
The feeling that goes away like you're talking about. Yeah.
But aren't these the questions that irritate us so often in life, in crosswalks and
What?
these are the questions that people are asking that irritate, and seem to irritate people throughout their lives and across nation. Meaning irritate, meaning continue to come back, continue to pop up. And, a lot of times it's either dismissed as, oh, I don't know, that's too, who cares, it's philosophy or something, or it's relegated to, and by relegated I mean dismissed as a religious experience, and so therefore it's not, a value to really consider. Or it's approached so scientifically, so technically, as to take out the most us part of the question. Why do I feel this way, kind of a thing. And so there's lots of questions I've been wanting to ask since I've been in this program. And it is nice to have a place to.
Well, not everybody believes this kind of area is valid or is possible. These kind of things are really real. So,
But this class brings that to the table and say, well, these questions are legitimate.
very you don't have to go the full time. I just, if you have anything further to get.
I just had, when I was reading the Bhagavad Gita, we didn't really touch on one of the last chapters, and I was just kind of confused when he talked about the three natures. He talks about Rajas, Tamas, and
Yes, the three
Sattva.
qualities of reality.
Okay.
Sattva, Raja, Tamas, those three things. Three levels of reality. One is pure, one is energetic, and one is heavy. There's a kind of qualities in everything. There's a kind of action which is quiet and pure and spiritually very fine. There's a kind of quality of action which is full of energy and struggle and attainment. There's another kind which is kind of heavy and dark and slow, kind of
So is one of them like the right one, or is it like they're all?
Yeah, very good question. You get the impression that one of them is really good, sattva. The other one is medium, but still honorable in its own way, and the third one is good. But they're all necessary part of life. Yes.
Yeah, I've heard them being called goodness, passion, and ignorance. So one is ignorance, slow, moving, like inertia, and passion, like mostly humans would have a lot of passion. And then goodness is like restricting yourself, like eating certain foods, always like abiding the truth.
Yes. Yes.
I'm wondering about this relationship that comes in threes.
Comes in where?
In threes. Like there seems to be in many spiritual languages, there's a relationship of the bottom, the intermediate, and the higher. And now with the gunas, it's again it seems the same. There's the bottom, there's the intermediate, and then there's the higher. Or the ancients talk about the bottom, right? Again, the Plato that talks about love, right? The intermediate and the higher. And I don't know if I have a question about it. It's just that it just struck me right now that everything seems to come in these threes.
Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. It's not exactly the bottom, the middle, and the higher.
Yeah.
It's also there. Well, I can't say too much about the bottom, the middle, and the higher. I think, no, but on the other hand, the idea of threes, everything that comes in threes, is, I'm a little clearer on that there is a kind of, look through nature, look at man and woman, male and female, positive and negative energy, light and dark. There's dualities throughout. And then for a human birth, it needs two to come together. Why is everything, in this case, why is it man and woman? Why is it, what is electricity, positive and negative? So many things are two, then they somehow operate harmoniously together in some way to produce a third element seems to have entered into to bring together these things, like the positive and negative electricity. Somehow they come together, but they don't clash. Something makes them work together to produce energy, and something works together with male and female to produce a child. And I think if you look at almost any phenomenon in nature, you have perhaps these dualities which somehow come together in nature. I think that if you think of it, but one thinks of it in terms of a kind of law of the universe, even, there needs to be a third principle to bring together the dualities. And the third principle may be very subtle, very hard to see, very hard to reproduce even. You don't know. For example, you have two people in a quarrel produces a reaction against it. Movements, and political movements, and social movements, in communal movements that you go in one direction or your own personal life. In one direction, it's very soon, sooner or later, there'll be a resisting force. You start to learn how to play piano, you're very interested. At a certain point, you get bored, you get tired, you give up, it's too hard, you lose it. Anyhow, there's always this, in diplomacy, for example, people struggle together. They're struggling for a compromise. But compromise has a negative connotation. It shouldn't be, but on the contrary, it can be very positive. Because a compromise means you have a third principle which includes something of both. Maybe the essential thing of both, or part of both, come together for a third, for a solution, where people can come together and produce something. So one doesn't take into account the resisting force that is going to come in everything we do. In communities, in the 1960s and 1970s, in California especially, there were all these new communities, wonderful ideals about justice and fairness and kindness to the planet, and love, and everyone is treated, respected. They came together, they had some land, they got some, and they started out, and sooner or later, boom, the resistance started to appear. And they decayed, they fell apart. Maybe because a leader became too grabby, or sex, or money, or power, all kinds of these forces came, and most of them dissolved after 10, 15, most 20 years from coming and soon, because they didn't take into account the resistance, the inevitable resistance that would come. So maybe a community that can last a long time, really church or something like that, maybe there's something built into that where they have, in some way, maybe even not even consciously, maybe even semi or even unconsciously, they are in such a way that they can handle and deal with and allow the resistance to be part of the whole process. And I think we see it in one's life. You start something, and sooner or later, something resists. It's like a law. Maybe it looks like it's coming from outside. You can see it in the life of nations. The United States at a certain point, after the Soviet Union dissolved and the Berlin Wall came down, and the United States was the one global power. It could do anything. It was all over the planet. The resistance appeared, but in a way that nobody ever expected it, through these terrorists, through all these militant groups. And right now, we're in a situation with Russia. We have a resistance. We don't know where it's going to go. We don't know where there'll be a third principle that can harmonize and make it go on further. So there seems to be some kind of a law that there are threes. And we don't know the third. Nobody can really tell. In the case of relationships with people or something, and that how to get that third thing. You see what I'm saying? And maybe life itself is made up of three forces, three principles. Living things. There may be a third principle that is the key thing for life. And science may be able to discover a lot about the first thing and the second thing, but maybe it has no idea about the third thing. And therefore will never really be able to create life. It only creates something that looks like it. Artificial intelligence or something like that kind of. So I think that's the part where I find the three things interesting. The higher, middle, and lower, not so clear. Well, I don't think it should be taken too literally. I think it should be, it's all part of the gradations or levels. The idea of levels is what, that insofar as we take that as a doctrine about levels of quality, then I can relate to it. Now there may be maybe many gradations, and the middle is sort of roughly the middle of the higher. Maybe in between that there may be many levels. And probably almost everything is a little bit of both, a lot of one and a little of the other. So you may be a very sattvic type of person, but you've got a lot of tamas coming in there too. So It's a good question, but three.
I just want to say that the, Earth, Middle Earth is between heaven and hell, right?
What?
Earth is between heaven and hell.
Heaven and earth?
Heaven and hell, Earth is between heaven and hell.
Yeah.
So that's the thing,
Heaven and hell. You know, there's a story called Dr. Faustus, which I was just talking about in the car. Faust, are you leaving?
Yes.
Do you want to come to this Sunday night?
Yes, I signed up already.
You on here? Okay.
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
see you Sunday.
There was a story about classic story of Dr. Faustus who gets, please feel free to leave. I'm not offended. Where he sells his soul to the devil. The devil comes to him and says, he's so tired, he knows everything, he can do everything, his philosophy, his upcoming philosophy is coming out of his ears, and he's bored, he's tired, he wants to sleep. This night, he says, if only I could find some happiness and meaning, and the devil appears and says, you can have anything you want, anything you want, as long as you want it, but when you die, I want your soul. We have to make a bargain. Sign it in blood. And of course, good, I'll do that. So he signs in blood. He gets a beautiful woman and a long life, and everything's going very well. And then it comes the time he's got to go to pay. So that's Goethe's element of that whole story. But this is an earlier verse, slightly earlier version of Faust, which when the devil, Mephistopheles, which is another word for the devil, comes to the Faust, and Faust is doing the same thing, he's wishing for magic to bring his life, but give it some meaning, and Mephistopheles comes and offers him the same kind of deal. And Faust says to Mephistopheles, what are you doing here? Why aren't you in hell where you belong? And Mephistopheles says, but sir, this is hell, nor am I out of it. So hell is this world for Mephistopheles, this world of unawakened people. So when you might say that this is one's own life can be hell, or it can be the other. So you use the word hell, and I think I understand what you mean. Hell is in its spiritual meaning. The word hell actually means absence of contact with God. And when the absence of God is, no human being can actually ever be really happy, have a meaningful life, according to this doctrine, without the presence of God in his life. So this is sounds very pious and okay, I've heard this story or something. But when you go under and peel it back a little bit more, it's very meaningful because a human being is an extraordinary structure, an extraordinary creation. If we think of it, it's not just, you can explain it away by saying lots of amoebas got together and mutated, and they became this, and they became a frog, and they became this, and they became all that bigger, and again suddenly became Leonardo da Vinci, and suddenly became, fine, I can accept that. It may be a process which goes on, but it's under the hand of something much larger. But a human being is a very, very special thing, because we have what's called, sometimes, you could call it, for lack of a better word, consciousness, intelligence, consciousness. And a human being can be capable of great unhappiness because of his consciousness. And this possibility, this unique brain, which finds so much difficulty and sorrow in the world, so much violence, so much horror, so much suffering. uniquely human. Animals don't suffer that way. They have pain, of course, but it doesn't seem that they suffer with the kind of anguish that a human being has. And it may be a sign that something is lacking in a human being that needs to be there. And mankind was built for something much higher than it's living at now. We're not built to be without God completely. Without, take the word God away and get the religious sentimentality away associated with it. And we're not meant to live without this other quality of energy, of consciousness in our life. In that sense, we're in hell now, sir. I know I don't want to make it too much of that, but it's not a good notation, so let's try it a little more. Well, Professor Needleman said we're all in hell. San Francisco State, maybe, but not. Save us. What?
I have a silly question.
You have what?
A silly question, maybe.
Silly question?
I don't know if it's silly, but if you could have dinner with any of the philosophers or religious figures or anyone you've ever read or studied, maybe you could have 2 guests for dinner. Who would you have?
Maybe you? What are you doing tonight, baby?
I will be happy to join you and the guest of your choice.
Well, that's a tough question, isn't it? Maybe a party, we could have a party. Guest list. I don't want to try and get too serious about that question.
Right, well, that's why it's a little fun question. Opposite of the hell question, just trying to look light.
I mean,
I'm reading.
I think I wouldn't mind having Gautama Buddha. I don't know if he eats what he eats.
Well, we're gonna have it catered lat kosher, so don't worry about that.
Well, you know, it's a good question if you ask me who is and what has been, I've understood to be the most important influence, but I'd like to hold that to you.
Okay.
Have you read any of my books?
I have. I'm actually reading, I've read a few, but the one I'm reading right now is about the American soul.
Okay.
And I've renewed it so many times at the library, I might as well just buy it because I'm never
Might
gonna.
as well buy it.
I might as well, right? I need
And
to
every book you
support it.
buy of mine is enough for me to buy a whiskey. drink.
Okay, well. You get one cocktail per book, that's a good deal.
One shot of whiskey is about all.
What's your favorite
Scotch,
kind of
that's
whiskey?
Scotch whiskey.
Scotch, me too.
Yeah.
Single Scotch, single
Yeah.
malt.
I have 2 questions. One is, are we allowed to bring any nice guests with us if we come on Sunday?
Yeah, talk to me about it afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, sure.
The second question is, if you were kind of related to that a little bit, if you had any recommended reading generally.
What I would suggest to read?
Yeah.
What have you read in your life that has meant the most to you, or meant a great deal? Have you read any book that have really made a mark?
So many, there's not one, it depends on what period of my life.
Well, suppose as a child,
The Chronicles of Narnia, you have to
What? were even smaller. Well, anyway, stay with the Chronicles of Narnia. That's good. That's good. But, and I always like to ask what books have been life-changing for you. Anybody have an? I'm thinking about your question.
Pragmatism by William James.
What?
Pragmatism by William James.
Pragmatism? William James. Pragmatism?
By William James.
What's the William James?
Pragmatism.
Pragmatism. Oh, wonderful. Great book.
Pride in the religious experience was, yes, that's a good one for me.
James is wonderful.
Carlos Castaneda.
What?
Carlos Castaneda.
Carlos Castaneda. I'm glad people still around.
Yeah.
The Don Juan.
Don Juan.
Yeah, there's, it's 9 of them.
Yeah.
I'm on the 5th one right now.
I think the first 3 or 4 of them was, after that it gets a little bit.
Yeah.
I have to think about that question seriously. I will. It always stops me, that question, for some reason. Because there's so many books that are nourishing. And to pick the one for you, I'd like to get to know you a little better.
I understand. I'm not looking for one specific thing. I mean, I have so many books that are important to me. I just was curious if there were any loose ideas of books that, you might like, but no pressure.
Yeah, okay. Then I feel obliged to be able to provide a reading list for people, at least 5 or 6 books that I consider to be good. So I will try to do that.
You have recommended some books throughout the course of.
The Life of Milarepa, for example. The Life of Milarepa. That's just a book about Tibetan Buddhism. And Milarepa, Milarepa, is a book by The Life of Milarepa, translated by a man named Lobsang Lalungpa, Lhungpa, Lobsang Lalungpa. That translation, there's another 1 or 2, some very scholarly, but that's a translation, that's a book, that's a wonderful book. It gives you a feeling of spiritual work that very few books, especially East Asian things, that are really special. But, I'll think of a couple more.
Kind of on this, I know this sounds silly, but now that I'm saying it out loud, it's not going to be silly. But I'm no longer going to be educated at this university. And
You are?
I'm not, yeah. And I think I've taken for granted all of this great spiritual influence here. And I'm reflecting on my time here, and I've changed. And I'm very concerned about continuing this work. So, I guess I'm asking for readings.
Yeah, I'll come to you.
Yeah.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Germany for a year.
Germany?
Yeah.
Where?
And probably going to study at Heidelberg. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's
Heidelberg, I know Heidelberg.
It's a pretty big university, yeah. But so I'm going to go there. But
Be there for a year?
yeah, and then after that, I'm not sure. But then I'm graduated, so.
Okay. Well, are you gonna come to this thing?
Of course.
I'll talk to you then.
Oh, okay. I'll talk to you then.
Yes,
I want to go back to that emptiness thing.
emptiness.
Yes. Once we experience, we are actually the emptiness. And it's time to think, how do we cultivate that feeling, right? What do you think? How do we cultivate the emptiness? I think that's actually what we are.
think there's no simple answer to this question. I think there's a lot of factors can enter into it. But there may be, it sounds a little strange, but maybe there are degrees of emptiness. Because it sounds like emptiness is either all or nothing. It's either empty or it's one little thing in it and it's no longer empty. I think there's a way of cultivating a moment of pause, of stop when you're in your everyday life. For example, you're in a conversation with somebody and things are going along back and forth and so forth, and maybe you take 1 second to not answer right away, to just be quiet before you respond. Nobody will notice it, nobody will pay attention. Or when you're having a meal, in our culture in the West and Christian families, there's something before you eat, a moment of saying grace. Now it's become, you say something, thank you to God for providing the food and with your friends and things. But maybe it's become a kind of just a ritual statement that doesn't mean much, but when it really means something, it means making a stop inwardly in front of something you wish for, food, and you make a kind of an empty moment where you're just not doing anything, you're just maybe thinking you like and think something, but it's the experience, the act of stopping the momentum, just for the sake of being inwardly free for a second, for a moment. So one can practice a kind of practice of just making an inner stop during the day, once or twice. You're walking down the street and suddenly you're all alone, say, and you're just walking and suddenly you just inwardly stop and you just look at the tree and you try to stop inside your thoughts and your reactions, just become quiet. It's not perfect, it's not the big emptiness, but it's a little emptiness which we can begin to practice in all kinds of ways of momentum to break the movement. There's always one thought after another, one impulse after another. We're not aware that in between these impulses there's a little space, but we're not aware of it, so we don't value it. We go from one thought to another. So moving a little slowly for a moment somewhere, just be there. That's a practice leading toward something very high, which is total emptiness. Now, you can find that when life delivers a blow to you, real shock, for a moment, and maybe for longer than a moment, you're completely empty. You don't know what to do. Your emotions are just overwhelmed by what's happening. That's something like a big emptiness. But I think what you're talking about is part of the spiritual practice, which is very essential, because it's in real silence that one can begin to understand things. So how to be silent is another way of putting the question. Not doesn't mean just not talking, it's inwardly silent. So I would just answer that there is a little bit of a movement toward that, the stopping of the momentum.
I've got a question of,
See, that was a good movement, but it was quiet. It wasn't empty. It was appreciated, I think. Sorry, that was
well, the question is actually related to this emptiness. In the readings, it mentions both authors, both Meister Eckhart and Krishna speak about both the soul and the spirit.
Speak about what?
Soul and spirit. And they're different. They're not the same. And I realize that my interpretation, from past religious just hearing those words, religious training and young when I was young, is that they're kind of the same. But there's a real differentiation here, and it speaks about the spirit can enter the soul. But there's these agents of the soul that are in the way. And so anyhow, I'm sort of wondering if that's somehow there's a process in which this entering, this preparation and entering leads to this emptiness.
But it can be, just, the words are used kind of loosely, although there's no one thing about it. But spirit tends to be the higher thing. Spirit represents God. In that kind of, I think, the gift of God. And the soul is kind of an intermediate between spirit of God and action in the world, life in the world. And so the soul can be inhabited by God, but it's less than it. It's real. It's inwardly. It's our higher part. But the spirit is usually taken to be our truly higher abilities. And Eckhart treats it that way too. So it's hard to, because it's used so often in so many different ways, you know, but it's hard. You have to look at the particular book. But I think maybe we've had it come up. Maybe we should either stop while we're ahead. And what do you think? How many people here are thinking of coming to that 6:30 Sunday? That's good. Okay. Let's